then life's a little bit different. Of course, theory matters, and that's the reason people still think about it when they design schemes. But it is a way for countries like ourselves to seek additional revenue for the kinds of technologies that we want and the kinds of technologies that countries like ourselves need as we transition over to cleaner pathways. Climate change hits all of us. It's really it's not nowhere near undebated. In fact, it's the opposite. In India, it's how badly does it hit us where? So if I'm in the business of wanting to promote better technologies, here's an incentive that's out there. So it performs different functions in different geographies and different economic political realities.
Absolutely. And how have you seen that evolve from, say, 20 years to today, where I feel it has become more flavor of the season versus what it was in the past? Of course, in a way that everyone understands it, I guess, better, but understands it still not well understood in the terms of conversations around it, in terms of a lot of platforms out there. You don't know the legitimacy of the platforms. There's a lot of criticism around greenwashing and attribution issues among developers, investors, double counting, etc. So while it's understood, it's still not well understood in some sense. How have you seen that evolution from past to today, and how do you think that will evolve, continue to evolve, and where will it end?
I must say the discussions in India are very different from the discussions in Europe, and very different from the discussions that I have seen going on in several parts of the African continent. So that's number one, and that's natural. We have different realities to deal with at different times. I mean, I would certainly not say it's fashionable. I mean, I really don't want to put it in that category because for us in India, we need all sorts of instruments. We need this policy instrument. We need this economic instrument. So I'd like for it to have the level of seriousness that it deserves after 20 years of maturity and 15 years of trading and 15 years of economic activity around it. In the European Union, carbon trading today is absolutely normal. When I started this business, when we all started out, it was an experiment. We were all very excited. We used to get excited going to a conference, and if 150 people showed up, we'd be thrilled that wow, there's 150 people working on carbon markets. At one time, we got 300, and we were delirious. But those were the days where it was a brand new thing. It was an experiment. It was pilot. The EU started off with it, and now fast forward so many years, and it's completely normal activity in EU. What has happened? You made some comments about greenwashing. I share. Well, I think I say I have certain concerns about greenwashing, as I think anybody should have concerns about greenwashing. But today in a positive way, we are in a situation today where companies are setting for themselves net zero targets.
Yeah.
And the downside is that the allegations of greenwashing are amongst the very few companies that have set net zero targets or targets of any kind. The allegations of greenwashing, or in fact not doing anything, are not on those that have set no targets. So I think the time is not just come, but there's enough experience and confidence in the market now amongst many of us who've been in this business for a while that you have to call a spade, and you have to call it out when you need to call it out. But let's also be mindful that if you are going to call out a company who has set a target and perhaps it's not enough, chances are those that have not set targets will be very shy to come forward. Why do I need the spotlight? Why should I get the spotlight? Why should I be attacked? So that second portion bothers me a little bit. So what bothers me about greenwashing is not so much what those few companies are doing. Of course, nobody wants greenwashing, but it slows down those that were at the margins.
Yeah, and I, like you said, the burden of entirety is on few, and then you sort of become the spotlight. That is true. But you also mentioned it makes you confident that the time has come now because a lot of people are adopting, and there is strong push in terms of CQuest journey also in this space, right? What part of the puzzle are you solving for, and is there something to learn from that experience also, both for enterprises
Hmm.
as well as entrepreneurs who are building in this space?
So um, I was involved in with CQuest at the time that it was set up about 10, 12 years ago. I have rejoined, of course, in a different capacity where I now co-manage the whole thing, as opposed to what I used to do so many years ago. CQuest is an investor in projects that generate carbon assets. It is a developer because you own the carbon asset and you develop it. And then it's also the implementer. So it's very heavy on operations. So it's an investment house plus an operating company, and therefore has many people very familiar with operations. We are using the purpose is to use carbon finance as an instrument for two things. In several countries, it is to deliver basic development outcomes. Where in so many African countries, down in the villages, in the most remote areas, putting forward basic cooking solutions, basic lighting solutions, basic fuel to fuel the cooking solution that we have given them. This is the job of maybe multilaterals together with the governments. Generally, private money is not likely to reach these households. So we've done millions, over 5 million. Here is an instrument that allows us to do this and allows people like ourselves to make money because how else can I expand it? So that's one. The other portion is, can I use carbon finance as a revenue stream to expedite the energy transition? So in countries like India, we are transitioning quite rapidly, as organized as we can, in as organized a manner as we can. But we also all know that we have to move much faster. But it's not so easy. I mean, we're not a small entity. We're also very complicated in our setup. But somewhere in there, um, can we use carbon finance to cover the gap between battery storage, renewable fed battery storage, and what's on the grid, so I can push solar into the evening hours, and I never need subsidy for that. So in a method like that, it seems so normally intuitive. That's the kind of stuff that we're doing at CQuest. We're not a trader. We develop this carbon finance stream because the assets are what fetches that value.
Got it. And what you said is essentially very critical, where you said what charge which should have ideally been led by government, DFI, multilateral, you're trying to bridge that gap. And agility is table stakes, right? So I think that brings me to the entrepreneurs. As we speak to more and more entrepreneurs, I think every week at least two or three new entrepreneurs who want to build in carbon markets are trying to touch different parts within carbon markets. Of course, they will be agile, and of course, they are also trying to take the private market approach to build what essentially would need humongous amount of capital from public markets or government. Any thoughts or ideas that, because again, what we do as part of these conversations is seed various ideas, because we are not building for today, but we are building for tomorrow. So a lot of these entrepreneurs will start on their journey today, and over 10 years, it will really fructify into making something meaningful. So, any gaps that you see which you would sort of throw out there and as a challenge, as a pose, as an opportunity to our entrepreneurs to think about, and what are the innovations you're seeing in those gaps? And again, the reason I ask is you don't only have India lens, but you have a very global lens into these markets, so something for us to learn from.
I mean, for sure, what I would certainly say for India, just because, and you're right, I am applying whatever I know over the last few years. There is a tendency in India to develop something against a current market. Now, if you were to base your business or the excitement around the business and the upside of the business on today's carbon market, chances are if I were an investor and evaluating and I didn't know that market, I would value that company very precariously because the market is in a certain volatile state right now. But it's a given that there will be a carbon market all over the world. There already are so many out there. It's also a given that naturally, when you have this increasing higgledy-piggledy set of markets, they will converge at some point. There will be some level of sanity that will arise, and that will be linkages that people will know. So look at it like many layers of of flyovers and roadway networks. Then we will get there. But I would certainly tell Indian businesses, think long. If you come in today with, I have something to sell on carbon markets, that's not very sustainable. Think with a purpose. What is the original purpose of the business? The day you start treating carbon as an upside, which is what a lot of Indian companies did in the early days, it was largely very attractive pocket money, if I can call it that, because it came as at the end of the investment. You didn't know if it actually came. But today, if you get into a structure, you can use that financial instrument in the closing of your project, in the closing of your financial gaps. At that point, you're wedded to the business. So then carbon doesn't stick out like like something else that doesn't belong primarily to that business. So integrated completely. And the day you integrate it, monitoring becomes seamless. Reporting, yes, has its like different schemes have different reporting. Verification becomes seamless because you're looking for the same thing.
Got it. And any particular sectors which will take off faster than the other, any particular white spaces where probably you will have a 5 year horizon versus 10 year horizon where there should be more focus at this time?
Which one will take off faster? Now, again, I'll focus my comments only again on India, because what happens outside doesn't necessarily have a link on India.
Absolutely.
And when it does, it happens later. Um, there is an increasing need amongst buyers in the carbon market that they want permanent credits. They don't ever want to be pulled up, or they don't ever want to feel like they bought these credits, but the reduction that was achieved, that project is no longer there. They want that. I buy some credits from trees and tomorrow they're deforested. Of course, I'm oversimplifying, but that's the idea. So, what gets us permanence? It is things that bring nature back, bring trees back, and bring your grasslands back. Those things have a long gestation time, but have a very, very high payout. So, very high risk, but also very high reward. High risk because you need a bit of working capital to sustain the gestation period. That is going to develop. It is already developing very quickly all over India. I mean, all over the world, and also in India as a result, because people are buying from India. The one huge advantage that India has is that we offer a stable economic environment. We offer, regardless of what sometimes it causes us concern. We offer a stable political environment as well. Our investments are sturdy. They can be stitched up, and we give people scale. So you can put serious money behind these things. So I'm looking forward to that coming up, and I'm really hoping that people like yourselves and others start to look at that asset class as a functioning asset class by itself. So that's one. In the voluntary market, there will always be activity, but increasingly things that abate methane because it's a problem. Carbon credits coming out of, there's a list, in fact, produced by the government of India for aspirational types of activities. So hydrogen and fuel cells and battery storage. Those things are where we need the money. Those are right now in a sovereign to sovereign kind of setup, and we don't have any experience there. But these are the areas that are out there. Others will remain. The one thing that will perhaps not fetch a good price going forward is credits from grid connected renewable power. They are, yeah. I think they've seen their light. They've seen their days in the sun.
Okay. No pun intended. So absolutely, I guess switching gears to the other hat that you wear, which is very relevant to today's conversation, also electric mobility. One last question. A lot of changes and a lot of innovation typically has been a function of enterprise, consumer, startups coming together, but a lot of work which happens around the policy, regulatory, academia circles as well. Uh, from your vantage point, do you see any key changes happening which will also enable the startup ecosystem in the country towards carbon markets? Or it's
You know,
okay to
I'm
assume the uncertainty there is at times?
I'm very hopeful, Swapna. I didn't answer one other part of your question. I'm very hopeful, of course, that more entrepreneurs come up. So it's not just the asset class that people invest in; it's also the value chain that goes in it. If you monitor something, you need a digital solution for it. If you verify something, this whole carbon market, at some point, really, I feel quite strongly about this, has to become digital.
Yeah.
And for that, you also need technology. So we need many more entrepreneurs coming up with these technology-based solutions for assessment, monitoring, verification, things that you would do anyway. I anyway have digitized when I submit my bill for a renewable power plant to the discom. The meter is not it's not a hand meter. That's a digital thing out there, and I've now linked it up to clouds and so on. We have to overlay that sort of technology and make it seamless with the carbon market. So there's a lot of I'm hoping to see many more entrepreneurs in that business. Blockchain, big developments in the business of blockchain, big developments in assessing integrity. So there's a lot of work there. The other piece of work perhaps is less on the entrepreneurial side and more on the policy side for us is, well, how do you treat this instrument? Is it a commodity? Is it a financial commodity? Can I swap? Are these derivatives? So we have some work to do there in how we treat this.
Got it.
How do we
And no,
tax it?
yeah, yeah, no, I think there will be some innovation that will happen there. And thanks for validating our thesis that a lot more entrepreneurs will innovate on technology and lead the charge and build for a country like India, especially because just our size. I think one or two people really can't solve, but you need a massive entrepreneurial energy to sort of build and bring that change. So thank you for that. Let's switch gears, talk about electric mobility. And as we get to that journey of yours from Yale, moving to India, being part of setting up executive program at IMA, and then sort of going the electric buses route, of course taking huge pay cuts in the process, I'm sure. How has your journey been? And what makes you most excited about the future of EV in the country?
Uh, Somewhere along my career, I started feeling like I need to do something bigger than myself. I wasn't sure what that meant, and I didn't have any means to articulate for myself. So, along the way, I decided that perhaps I should achieve a level of impact. So, one asks these questions, what impact means. It was somewhere at that point, about 4 or 5 years ago, maybe 4 years ago or so, that I got into a conversation with somebody in Delhi who asked, why would you not want to try out government? Because government appears to, it will give you the scale that you're perhaps looking for. And I was never obvious about the scale thing, but perhaps it showed that I need to do something bigger, more impactful. So that's the point at which, and I owe this person a lot of gratitude for just sparking that certain risk being in me. So it had become clear that, yeah, I was getting, I had become quite senior. That's all great. You can change the course of an organization, and I was very grateful to have reached that. So I decided to take a bit of a plunge, and it took me 3 months of very intense decision making. People I spoke to at those 3 months don't want to talk. They didn't want to talk to me for a year because I'd bothered them so much. Because it was new. I've never worked in the government. I've always been interfacing with the government through my intergovernmental role, so I was not totally unfamiliar with things like procurement and processes and so on. But it's very different to be inside. But I decided, fine, I'm going to go for it because today in my career, I want transformative impact. Again, as I got in, I said, I don't really know what it means, but I'll figure it out because I have the platform, and the government is, in fact, it's great to give you that platform. I would still say it's. I had, of course, a great time. When you ask me, do you ever sleep? I think in the government that during those days, people would ask me if I was not well. um, so that was the motivation, saying, let me give it a shot. It's a crazy quote unquote career plunge because it's not what people like us do. We don't come from the government, so we're not used to that system. It's also very different, and you're nervous, you're scared. But anyway, so that's the plunge I took. And I said, I'm just going to go for it because I want to see if I want to prove two things. I'm very clear. I wanted, of course, prove to myself that I could do something bigger. But I also wanted to prove to myself that we're able in India, despite all of our criticisms of the system, to achieve change. It's entirely possible to achieve it, even with the speed that we managed to do it with the electric mobility stuff. So, it is absolutely possible. So when people sort of complain and they become all negative, today I just feel like, no, there is a lot of space um, to make change in India, and there's a
Good.
lot of sorry, go ahead.
No, no, go ahead.
There is space to put out new ideas. There is space to put out some entrepreneurism, and like every system, there are drawbacks. No system is perfect.
No, I was just resonating. That could not resonate more if you want to, you can really make things move, and that's possible with current infrastructure that the country provides. But also folks like you coming from different walks of like really walking into that and taking the plunge, like you said, to create that change. Would love to see more and more of that talent come in and do that, bring that change. Again, assuming you had a great journey and just some achievements and lessons from there, because electric bus, when we were start talking about it as we started this conversation, right? It seems to be that big mammoth can't be moved, and over time it became a reality. So, talk to us about some of those achievements and lessons, which also sort of brings us back to how electric mobility will transform in India.
Um, so as I got in, there was another person that asked me, and I won't put out names here, but I owe him additional gratitude. Said, what exactly are you going to focus on, and what level of change do you feel you want to make? And I didn't have an answer. This was perhaps in the first 2 weeks of something of getting in, and I was quite inundated, just playing catch up and learning and going and meeting people and being introduced to them. But I didn't have an answer, and that question haunted me for some time. So I had two issues in front of me. We could work on electric mobility because the country was making the right sort of noises. There were a few cars on the road, there were some promising new ones coming along, and there were some real conversations amongst people who had invested a lot of time, effort, and money into the technology. So the technology part gave me a fair bit of confidence and relief that we're not just going to be riding a storm. So if I were to bite this, maybe because there's investment in technology and there's thinking out there, perhaps we could build on it, because then you're not building on a fad. And all of this might sound very frivolous to people in the sector who've been in the business of electric for like 7-8 years, because they've been talking about it. But I was brand new. I don't know anything about electric, nothing. I knew nothing about cars either, let alone buses, or even STU. So that's a whole different animal. So I decided to focus, and more than electric mobility, I think part of me said, well, if you've got to scale, rule number one is you have to focus. It seems contrary, but focus I think, is the recipe for scale. The day you start moving around here and there, your ability to become bigger, more impactful comes down. So I decided I was going to focus on electric mobility. And so we had built up this new SPV that was given to me to build out. Along the way, you're scratching around looking for models because we didn't have models and we're designing them as we go along. Let's design a model for business model for two-wheelers. Let's design something for three-wheelers. How do I get more cars on the road? My parent company was already in the car leasing business, so I had something to start with. But how do I do more of that? And then what do we do about buses? So that's what started the journey around. There was a bit of trial and error. Here's a business model that works. That business model comes out of some research. We zoomed in on buses largely because one, I felt two-wheelers, the market's taken off by itself. So you ask yourself, what is the need of a government entity over here? I didn't have an answer to myself, so let the market take it up because, of course, that's what I think the market should do. They should take it up. For three-wheelers, I think we can say that it was very difficult. I really cannot say that a big job was done for that. Yes, we've put out some three-wheelers on Delhi roads, on some in Bangalore roads, but hardly anything. So we couldn't manage for different reasons. For cars, it was always there. Let's try and just change the fleet for the government of India and for the government of other states. So let's just find a business model and just change that. For buses, I decided along the way that if I'm going to be in government, then I have access to this public sector, state sector institution that otherwise nobody's really going to touch. And from outside, private sector cannot even do it. So let me just work on that one because that affects people. So in a government hat, which one do I focus on that has the highest social impact, largest number of people? It is a huge people carrier, huge. And it needs to be a much bigger people carrier that we have. So that was the reason we ended up focusing on buses. And of course, a lot of things helped. We were mandated by the government, so that helped give you the legitimacy. It was then upon us to figure out what do you do with that legitimacy? You have to create a business model. And then we had to go around recruiting people, recruiting states into a common tender. We had to go and talk to recruit them into your plan. So I must have met so many states and so many secretaries of transport in these states. And it was great. I mean, all I can say that, it was anything between, it was all positive, but it was anything between, let's give her something. Let's see, this is a bit of an experiment, Lo. If it works, it works. Whereas others who were much more involved in the process were a little bit more converted to working with your methods. It just so happened that when we ended up opening the first tender, a lot of work had gone in the development of that document. That document was developed by consensus. I did not want to draft something and just put it out there. I wanted people to believe in it. I wanted them to tell me if they can't do something, I will have to change it. It's not a great document, but I'd have to change it because you have to understand the realities of things. So it was a document made out of consensus. We ended up getting, as you know, prices that were significantly cheaper than diesel.
Yeah.
So that's when I think another set of people woke up that, wow, you can make electric cheaper than diesel. It's counterintuitive, but it goes to show that, if you design a business model properly, it is entirely possible to get it done. Not to say that it's anywhere near done, but at least people are now not saying, it's actually the opposite. When I was leaving the government, the demand for buses was much more than what we could supply. And the demand for buses was much more than what financiers were able to absorb the risk for. So suddenly you had states wanting to change their portfolios. And I think I took a great level of comfort, relief, and satisfaction that at least a certain level of the business model has been made now normal. States came into a unified tender. Transport is a state matter. They have no reason to come into a unified tender. It's their business. But it goes to show if you work with people, you can get to agreement eventually. Eventually.
No, I think I took a lot of words there: focus, impact, scale, create consensus. Lot which our entrepreneurs can learn from as they build their businesses. So, buses, great success story, or like you said, success story in the making. Was there any existing playbooks you could use at that
Yeah.
time? Are there other playbooks which other people can think about using from, learning from?
Yes. So that was an important consideration for me in a certain level of responsibility you keep as a government public officer. You can't do all these. You can't do scale and speed and completely new all at the same time. Completely new business model or completely new anything all at the same time. I think that's a very risky proposition. So I was lucky that this particular business model had been tested in a few cities. Delhi had some experience, Bombay had some experience, Bangalore had some experience. It was few, but there were some people I could talk to. So I took a great level of comfort working with those early leaders, bringing them in, saying, you're the people that have done this, and you're the people that did this well before me. You did it in your city. I'm doing it across other states, but you know the business model, you know how it works, you know what doesn't work. So they were very generous with their time. The other thing um, I learned along the process is I went to see as many as I could countries that have delivered, or I was looking for business models for public transport, electric or otherwise. So we looked at a few Latin American cities. We looked at London. I looked at Dusseldorf, a number of places. China. China was a little hard because of everything was in Chinese, so it's a little difficult. But studied as much as possible, reached out to as many people as possible, and somewhere along the way, through a little group that we had set up, a little working group with some states and others, we put out a appropriateness of these solutions. So yes, I had something to start with, but the one biggest, the piece that we did not have anybody had is how do I put state-based orders into a central tender, because they have no control on the tendering. They don't get the operator. They have no view on the operator that comes out. But
Yeah, so
it's
operational
doable.
challenges along the way, navigate them and get there, I guess. Any other white spaces in your mind, Mahua, that exist in AV? Like I loved how you put it. Two wheeler was already done. Three wheeler, the scale didn't seem relevant. Four wheeler, cars, it was different, and for buses, it just seemed that it could be an all India sort of impact and scale it could bring. What are the other white spaces, given you have been in the space, you're seeing what's happening? We at Avaana, we have invested in a couple of companies in EV. We have done an EV financing play. We've done an EV operating system software play called Kazam. We have done Alpha Vector, which is electric bikes. We continue to look across and we see many entrepreneurs building across spaces. But what are the other key white spaces that you see which could become the next gold mine, if you will?
So with three wheelers, Swapna, I think it's sorry. It's not as if the scale was not big enough. It's that I couldn't find a. There were two things that let us down in a way. At the affordability level of people that could buy these vehicles. Now I'm talking about the quote unquote auto driver, what's called public passenger auto. At the range bracket that they can afford these things, they want a longer mileage. Now, for a longer mileage, you need a bigger battery or a better performing battery or a different battery. Bigger battery means higher cost. So I escape the cost, I escape that range. So that takes me to who is going to finance these people? there were no, unless things have changed in the last 1.5
Yeah, no, we
months.
invested in a company called Turno to enable that transition.
That's it. That's it. They have the owners of these vehicles, and whichever way you cut it, uh, people would tell me, oh, there's an increasing B2B business. But actually, even in the fleet and that other segment, they are still an individual that owns the vehicle.
Yeah.
That individual that has to go out and secure that vehicle and then gets paid for rides. So somebody should take the risk of that individual who owns a vehicle for whom it is employment, basic, fundamental, and primary, and perhaps even only employment. So that was a big hole, that the product itself was perhaps not catering to what people needed. We didn't have enough in swapping stations. We could have put swapping stations every 10 kilometers and that would have fixed the problem. We didn't have to put up swapping stations is a very complicated business because you get into the business of land and who belong, all of that. So there was a timing mismatch. So that's the three-wheeler thing. Where are the white spaces? Huge. There are there's so much opportunity. Financing is a big one for three-wheelers and for buses. It's a
No, I'm
very
glad you are
different problem.
saying this. It's a great point, validates our thesis of investing in Turno. But what more areas are there?
Financing is a big one. Digitization is a very big one. We need plenty more digital and digitized solutions out there. We just don't have enough. Um, I mean, there's just so many things. You can develop carbon credits from this.
Yeah.
There are people, and those carbon credits are very valuable. They don't have to be an extra revenue stream because we just made it cheaper than diesel, but you need it for risk mitigation, payment guarantees, and so on. So, payment guarantee is a big one. There are so many things. There's so much of work to be done in batteries, different types of batteries, different chemistries, so much of work to be done with swapping. I wish I could see, I mean, I want my landscape around me to have swapping stations. I used to say, like, when I step out of my house, I know I'll find an ATM somewhere. I'm not actually so worried when I don't have cash, because somewhere around in a quick enough radius, I'll find an ATM. To put up a swapping station is not, I mean, is not that much
Yeah.
more clunky than an ATM.
And it's
So
about the
we've got to make
network
it up.
effect, right? You
Network
put up
effect,
a,
we've got to
yeah,
find other business model,
yeah.
retailify it, all those things.
Absolutely. And I know our audience already has started typing in questions, so I want to leave another 10 minutes. I'll ask you two last questions on mobility and then open up. One is, since you touched swapping, are you in one of the other camps, swapping versus fast charging? Do you believe in both the camps? How do you think India will evolve?
India is very big. If you pick on one horse, you're always worried that the other one will win. It
Totally.
is just so big because we have such huge headroom. We
Yeah.
have so much of work to do. The I mean, we've got to have both.
Yeah.
Where you can put up, you can slice and dice the problem, and people have talked about it for hours. You can put up public charging stations for cars and buses and other things. Yes, and opportunistically, if you've got the space for a public charging station, of course you'll put a lower charger for a smaller vehicle. But that doesn't mean it's an either or. They will both survive, and they'll both do
Yes.
very well. Not survive. There's enough demand.
Yeah, you're serving a country of 1.4 billion people. So, fair point, there's enough and more. I think last question from my end, and then I'll open. Since you mentioned public charging, there has been this recent announcement for unified energy interface,
Hmm.
and there has been this conversations. Any thoughts, any views, any innovation that you see around that?
So I think, Swapna, it's a good development. It's a I see it as a positive development towards market building. A lot of our charging station work initially revolved around which protocol, what do we do, what about this, what about that. So in the first stage of the electric mobility work, where I was not in the government, but I inherited some things that are already done, and they were done with the most inclusive mind. Let's try and get all of these charging protocols, whichever takes off, takes off. But after that, the they became in some ways unfortunate hassles, if I can call it that. Barrier would be too strong a word, because again, the market is so big, you can still put up your very proprietary technology and there'll still be people for it. But it's an unnecessary hassle. If you want to scale something, the second ingredient is to make it simple. So as simple as
Absolutely.
possible. Therefore, a unified payments, huge one. Unified energy interface, huge one.
Yeah, I'm also looking forward to the developments and how that evolves. I think people want you back on carbon markets, so we have a lot of questions around carbon markets. So we'll get there. So,
Uh,
couple of questions, and I'm going to read it out to them. So, one of the question is, how big is the carbon trading market globally? Who are the key players and startup and companies in India on this forefront? Do you have any thoughts, views, Nova?
the global carbon market is over 300 billion US dollars. So it's not small. And the voluntary portion of that is growing in leaps and bounds. So it's a very small number compared to the 300 plus billion US. But because it's growing in leaps and bounds, it's going to be there. What does the Indian market look like? I really have no idea in terms of numbers. It's been some time that I even engaged in the Indian market. Right now, I happen to be based in India, and I look forward to building it out here. But there are a number of companies who have been active in the first era, if I can call it that. They were a lot of consulting companies, largely developing the documentation. I'm hoping to see many more with investments in the business. Let the consulting companies do what they're doing. They do a really good job and they're a necessary part of the ecosystem. Absolutely. But we also need more players to come in, right? We need more players to hinge their businesses on carbon finance. That's how you get it you make it a serious instrument. So that will come. And I'm optimistic that that will happen. You see, because we had this new regulation announcement recently. And yes, there's a lot of work to be done, but it didn't just come out. It took 18 months of preparation to get there. It signals a certain direction of travel where this country is going. So it's only going to go in a certain way from here. It has legitimized the discussion. Today I can have a discussion on taxing carbon revenues with a lot of auditors. I couldn't do that earlier.
Yeah, no, I think directional sense definitely helps. Do you think this Saurav's question is, will this also allow large India-based conglomerates to be allowed in voluntary carbon markets without any government regulations?
I think large Indian conglomerates are anyway playing in the voluntary carbon market without any government regulation. So they're already there. For the Indian market,
Yeah.
we have to make sure that we take seriously and enforce with seriousness our targets, our efficiency targets, and targets for CO2 control and greenhouse gas control and other gases. The day we enforce that seriously, people will take it seriously. Companies will put it into their investment planning decisions, and then they will buy carbon for it or against, depending on how much they need. Sorry, I need to cough. Um, so they're anyway there. Many of our big corporates, industrial houses have been thinking about deep abatement, or what they call deep decarbonization. How will I ever decarbonize the steel industry or cement? Because there are technological limitations after a point. And then you'd really have to innovate big time or invest huge amounts in alternatives like hydrogen fueling and so on. So some work to be done there, because I know that they're feeling the pressure. We're in a we're in a connected world. Their parent companies have or targets. Their own companies who are situated somewhere else have greenhouse gas reduction targets. Their purchasers have targets. So we're getting pressure from a lot of places.
Yeah.
So they're already playing in it. We just have to make sure that our targets are enforced.
Absolutely. So, I mean, last question, and I want to wrap up this is you've chosen to stay back. I suppose you are in Delhi. What are the other
Yes.
areas you are excited about? What else are you looking forward to other than, of course, your role that you're leading at today?
Well, first one is I want more. I would love to see, and I'm going to try and work on it. People like yourselves engaged in these investments, in the making of these instruments, in the making of these funds and businesses. We need many more leaders like yourselves. You all have come forth. You're ahead of the curve, but we need many more. And it's better for all of us if there are more, because you also get a bit of cover, right? You don't only just want to be sticking out. I'm also hopeful that we can spur a community of innovation. Again, people like yourself, people like others who are like-minded, can we bring them together and start to develop stuff that at scale, again back to big programmatic, big portfolios, big assets we want to further. We want to invest in battery storage. I really think we should make that as a service, just like we did with electric. We made mobility into a service. We will convert these things into service models.
Yeah.
So that sort of innovation I want for us to build a community around, because we're all private companies now. I mean, there's so much the government will do, and there's so much else that the rest of us will have to do. I'm looking forward to that. I'm really looking forward to seeing how visibly we can expedite the energy transition. A lot of
Yeah.
work needs to be done. That may, I mean, that does not necessarily have to be carbon. I mean, I have a day job, but I also have a mind. Um, there's a lot of policy innovation we need to do, and I hope that somebody picks it up. Sometimes you kind of have to pull people in and say, look, this is the kind of work that needs to be done. Let's try and see if somebody can get you funded to do it, because it needs to be done. It's not something that single private companies do, because it's not mandate. So I'm looking forward to building out on the energy transition. I'm looking forward to staying. Um, I hope that all this electric mobility work absolutely takes off.
Yeah.
I can see some signs in Delhi already. Fingers crossed. And yeah, so there's a lot to do over here. It's a very exciting space, and it's an exciting time to be in India.
If Anjali was on this call, she would have absolutely loved this because we often talk about, and I don't know if she's there and if she can opine, but we always talk about this whole bringing a village together and public, private, our
Yeah.
partnership, how all ecosystems
Mm.
need to move the agenda forward, and especially when you're solving for climate. I mean, if you're solving for,
Yeah.
say, building the next large e-commerce, probably you can do it in
Yes.
silo.
Yeah.
But if you're solving for something as large and enormous as she's here, yeah.
She's
So
here.
Anjali, do you want to opine? We were just talking about how you need to wear multiple hats to get climate change happen.
Oh, absolutely, Mama, music to our ears. And I know you and I, at least we violently agree on most of these things.
Yeah.
And bringing policy and private markets and technology. So actually getting the confluence of markets, technology, and policy together. I think that's kind of the magic trifecta. And
Mm.
having more people like you, and we are certainly happy to put shoulder to wheel as well, and hope to do more together.
Likewise, look forward, Atli. Really look forward to working
Terrific.
with all of you.
Thank you,
Well,
Anjali, and
thank you.
thanks, Mahua, for your time today. I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation, and our audience too did, and we look forward to collaborating with you on more such opportunities in future.
Thank you. Thank you once again for having me. And good
Sure.
luck. I hope you do more of these. Thanks.